All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to BACP's webinar on the overview of Chicago's reopening plan for the food service industry. My name is Isaac Reichman. I am the Director of Public Information for the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into this webinar. First, I have confirmed that my microphone is working okay, so if you can't hear me, please adjust your volume or send any questions via chat. We will be, this webinar will last an hour. I'm going to cover in detail the industry guidelines specifically for the food service industry. I'm going to talk about what different types of businesses fall within that industry and about what the specific guidelines are for that industry, and then a little bit about the different permits and licenses, either already existing ones available or new ones available specifically for the outdoor dining that is allowed under this license. So under this phase 3 plan. So a little bit before we get into this, I want to talk about kind of the current situation we have facing the city of Chicago, and talk a little bit about what the mayor announced this morning and the mayor's message going forward. So as I'm sure you know, the mayor announced last week that we will be transitioning into phase 3 of our reopening plan tomorrow, Wednesday, June 3rd. Obviously, with everything going on over the last few days, the mayor, the police commissioner, and the health commissioner have looked very closely at that date, and they've determined that we are still ready to reopen, to cautiously reopen, to move into phase 3 beginning tomorrow, Wednesday, June 3rd. So that's definitely want to lead with that before getting into details of these guidelines. So the plan again is still to cautiously reopen beginning tomorrow. A little bit more about what's been going on over the last few days. We want to make sure that businesses throughout the city in every neighborhood know that the city is working hard for you during this time. So if we've at BACP, we have a connection with over 100 different local chambers that we have relationships with, chambers and business service organizations. We've been working very closely with them in order to provide support, answer questions, and address issues as they come up. So we ask local businesses to please be connected and please reach out directly to your local chamber. You can find more information about your chamber and who to reach out to at chicago.gov/NBDC. The mayor also announced today at the morning press conference that she will be working on a rebuilding fund for businesses that have been impacted. We're working hard to put that together, and we'll be sharing more information soon. And as I said, we're ready for reopening, and the mayor's made it clear that we're moving forward with reopening starting tomorrow. However, we know that not every business in every corridor is going to be ready to reopen starting tomorrow. And we ask, that you work very closely with your chamber and, follow the guidance of your local police commander, your local police district, to understand what the best route forward is for you, the business owner. Because we know people have a lot of concerns right now. And it's ultimately up to the business owner to make that decision to move forward with reopening starting tomorrow. But again, tomorrow is that reopening date. Great. A little bit about as I get into. Great. I apologize. This says health and fitness agenda. I promise the rest of this is about food services. That's just a typo from this morning's webinar. A little bit more housekeeping. If you have any questions during this webinar, please submit them via the chat function. Do not use the Q&A. Please use the chat function. There are 2 different avenues for asking questions. I can't look at both of them over the course of the webinar, so please use the chat function to ask questions, and I will be answering them as best as I can over the course of the webinar. There's a lot of content, and there's a lot of very specific questions that I know you have. And that's why on the bottom of every slide, you will see BACP outreach at cityofchicago.org. So any question that I either do not get to or I am unable to answer, please submit immediately to that email, and I will work and my team will work to get you those answers as soon as possible. Also, as you'll see later on in this slide, I do have specific contact information and email addresses for specific questions about different types of permits. You can always reach out to BACP Outreach and I'll connect you with the right folks, but please do use those specific email addresses to get the answers you need for other specific questions. Great. So I got a great question. I should have mentioned this. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our website at the same place you got into today's webinar. That is chicago.gov/business workshops. Also on that website, you'll find information on the overview of the entire guidelines in English and Spanish. And then we're doing 5 different industry webinars. This is number 3. We've also done personal services, health and fitness. Tomorrow we're doing retail, and Thursday we're doing commercial buildings. Great. So a little bit about today's webinar. I'm going to start by talking about phase 3 as a whole, because while today we're focusing on food services, you all should know really what tomorrow means for you as a resident of Chicago, not just as a restaurant business owner. And also why we're here, because everything is about the health metrics. I'm going to talk about the guidance for you, for your sector reopening. I'm also going to talk about, again, the different permits, the different licenses, an overview of how to navigate those. Now, I may not be able to answer very, very specific questions about those permits. If you have specific ones I'm unable to answer, again, either use that outreach email or there'll be contact information for the right folks later on in this presentation. Finally, I'm going to go over some reopening resources that'll help you in general. And it's right here. It's in big letters on this slide. Please, if you haven't already, visit chicago.gov/reopening. This is where you'll find all the industry guidelines and an overview of what phase 3 means for the city of Chicago. First, I want to talk about phase 3 as a whole, and not just before I get into the specifics of the food service industry. As you know, as I mentioned, we will be transitioning tomorrow from phase 2, stay at home, to phase 3, cautiously reopening. And if you listen to the mayor talk about this, our slogan is changing too, from stay home, save lives, to be safe, Chicago. Because we're saying you don't have to all the time stay home anymore. So what does this mean? Mayor has said this a couple times, and I want to reiterate this. This is a dimmer switch. This is a dimmer switch that we are slightly turning. We're not flipping on a switch tomorrow. This isn't going to be a totally different city tomorrow. So the goal is to thoughtfully, cautiously begin to reopen Chicago safely while still protecting our residents and particularly our most vulnerable. So non-essential workers can begin to return to work, but in a slow and phased way. Certain businesses that have been closed, such as food service, can begin to reopen with protections in place, which we'll talk about today. What does this mean for your life? You can now meet others more than you have before, but when you do so, physically distance yourself and wear a face covering. Non-business social gatherings are limited to 10 people. 10 people max. And that's the magic number for gatherings. That doesn't mean capacity of every building, every business is 10 people, but it means gatherings where people are all gathered together for the same purpose should be limited to 10 people. So what does this mean for restaurants? You know, if you have parties coming in all together, one group, that group shouldn't have more than 10 people. Even if they're split up into different tables, the gatherings are limited to 10 people. And that's a magic number across industries and across recommendations. Finally, and this is probably the most important thing to get out of this, not the specific industry guidelines, we're not out of this health crisis. The mayor, the commissioner, health commissioner made it very clear. We are not out of this health crisis. Now, the metrics that I'm going to show you on the next slide show us that we're ready for phase 3. But phase 3 is just cautiously reopening. We are still in the midst of a pandemic. So what does this mean? Stay home if you are sick. That's the case today. That's the case tomorrow. It's the case a month, 2, 3 months from now. If you are sick with COVID-19, do not go into work. Employers cannot force their workers to come to work if they are sick with COVID-19. And especially, please continue to physically distance yourself from vulnerable populations, elderly and those with underlying conditions. And if you have symptoms, get tested. This hasn't been the case the whole time. At first, we asked people that were otherwise healthy not to get tested. But now we have increased our testing capacity. We're testing over 5,000 Chicagoans a day. And this testing site's all over the city. So if you are sick, if you have symptoms, get tested. That's the only way we're really going to get out of this crisis. Again, before getting into the specifics for food service, I think it's really important to say how we got here. Why are we ready for phase 3? This wasn't a random date picked on a calendar. This wasn't the mayor saying 2 weeks ago, hey, I want June 3rd. That looks like a great date. The mayor and the health commissioner determined health metrics a month ago and said, hey, if we reach this point, we'll be ready to go to phase 3. And we did. We're very happy to say, while we're not out of the crisis, we've reached some very, very important metrics. We're having a declining rate of new COVID-19 cases across the board, across neighborhoods, across ethnicities, across settings. Declining rate of cases leading to death, hospitalization, ICU use. We also, and this is something that Chicago's been lucky enough to have this entire time, we have adequate hospital capacity. Adequate hospital beds, ICU beds, ventilators. We've been good on that, and we are. And that means if there were to be a spike down the road, God forbid, we would be ready. We also set the goal of testing at least 5% of Chicagoans per month, and that is about 4,500 tests per day. As I said, we're over 5,000 tests a day, so we're solidly at that goal. And our goal is to have less than 20% positive tests, and again, we're at that goal. Then finally, we have a plan in place for contact tracing and community investigations, both at congregate settings and again in the community. And that means we're ready to transition to phase 3. Again, phase 3, cautiously reopening under restrictions starting tomorrow, Wednesday, June 3rd. So what sectors are opening up? Ooh, sorry about that. What sectors are opening up? You can find a full list of this at chicago.gov/reopening. Childcare, childcare centers, family childcare. City services like parks and libraries. One quick point of clarification, they will not be opening up until Monday, June 8th, but they will be opening up obviously early in phase 3, city services. Office and real estate, office-based jobs, professional services, real estate services. Hotels and lodges, outdoor attractions like boating, but let me make one thing clear, the lakefront is not open at this point. So while boating is allowed, boating is limited truly to the Riverwalk, and while golfing is allowed, lakefront golf courses will not be open. Retail stores will be reopening. Non-essential ones like clothing shops, beauty supply shops, places like that can reopen. Personal services, hair, nail salons, barber shops, tattoo parlors, etc. And then finally, health and fitness clubs under retail will be open. And then, again, the reason why we're here today, restaurants and coffee shops, food services will be opening for outdoor dining, and that's the focus for today. So it's a little misleading. I know we have restaurants and coffee shops there, but it's really a lot more than just that. So what will be opening and what is included in food service? So restaurants and cafeterias, including full service restaurants, limited service restaurants, food courts, cafeterias, buffets, places like that. Catering and mobile food service can reopen. Snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars, bagel shops, coffee shops, bakeries, cafes, ice cream shops, etc. Really, food service is a wide range of items, but the one thing that it does not include is any establishment that only serves alcohol. Bars, lounges, nightclubs, breweries. It's very simple. If you have a retail food establishment and you serve food to consume, then you can reopen under these limited guidelines. But any place that only serves alcohol will have to wait until phase 4. Right. Some other industries that aren't reopening immediately in phase 3, museums will be opening up later in phase 3, but not right away. Youth activities, same, will be opening later. Schools will not be opening up under phase 3. Outdoor large event spaces will not be opening up under phase 3 as well, though small event spaces with fewer than 10 people can reopen. So what can you find on this chicago.gov/reopening site? And I do see some questions coming in. Just to let you know, I'm going to try to get through the bulk of the guidelines first before answering questions. Please do feel free to submit those questions, and I will, when I get to a natural stopping point towards the end, I'll make sure to try to answer those questions. So what can you find on this reopening website? As I said, there's detailed industry guidelines that was developed, were developed with a broad group of folks involved in that, with the health department based on CDC guidelines, global benchmarks, and other associations. There were large groups of people from each industry working on developing these guidelines. It wasn't just the mayor making a choice. It certainly wasn't just BACP deciding this is what it is. There's a lot of groups involved. Great. Self-certification you can also find on the website. This is a way for you to, and I'll go in a little bit more detail, take a pledge to show that you are ready to reopen under phase 3. Then there's also additional resources, posters you can download, national, state, and international guidelines to help you understand this a little bit better. Questions can be submitted to 311. They also, again, this email is on every single slide, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. So what can you find within all of the guidelines? So for every industry, they're kind of broken up in the same way. Talking about healthy interactions, social distancing and gathering size. Your magic number for social distancing is 6. This is something we've been using from the beginning. It's something that we'll be carrying forward into phase 3. Your social distancing number is 6 feet. Your gathering sizes should be limited to 10 or fewer. Again, this does not mean the capacity of your restaurant needs to be 6 or fewer. It just means individual gatherings need to be 6 feet or fewer. Sorry, it's 10 or fewer. Get my magic numbers confused. Protective gear, face coverings, you will see on every single industry. Face coverings are a requirement with some specifics depending on different industries, which I will get into. And then hygiene requirements, obviously, as well. Safe spaces and conditions. Every industry is going to require employees to do some sort of self-screen. Now, most industries, we're not mandating a temperature check in most industries. At minimum, we are asking employees to do a self-screen before they enter the workplace. Do I feel sick? Do I have a fever? Do I have a cough? Anything like that. And also, visual guidance should be posted, and workplace conditions should be changed in order to minimize the spread. Finally, operational resilience and monitoring. How will you make sure that plans are in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19 into the future? So, how do you have a flexible business model? Travel guidelines. How do you test? How do you track? You'll also find in these guidelines the list of questions that constitute this self-screening, other public health resources, and a glossary. What do we mean by social distancing? What do we mean by gathering? Things like that. Great. So now I'm going to talk in detail about the industry guidelines for food services. First, a couple points of clarification. Again, any place with a retail food establishment license is able to reopen with outdoor dining, which I'll talk about in much more detail here. This means if you are a bar, if you are a tavern, and you do not have a retail food license, then you cannot reopen. So if you have a tavern or a bar that does not serve food, you cannot reopen. Now, if you have a tavern and you also have a retail food establishment license and you do serve food, then you can reopen. So what is different now for food services? This first page gives you just a general overview, and then I'm going to go into each one of these in a little bit more detail. First, we strongly encourage contactless payment. A lot of you set up wonderful contactless payment and curbside pickup and things like that. We do encourage you to keep that going because that is the best way to prevent the spread. Outdoor dining is permitted following standard social distancing requirements, which I will talk about again in a little bit more detail. Signage needs to be posted throughout facilities. Employees are required to wear face coverings, and guests are required to wear face coverings any time in which they are not seated. Employees and diners are encouraged to maintain 6 feet of social distancing, and employees should be frequently disinfecting facilities. All right, so now next 3 slides, I'm going to go over these guidelines in detail, and then I'm going to take some questions about what these guidelines exactly mean. So first, social distancing. You should be ensuring 6 feet of social distancing between individuals and close choke points. What does this mean? Tables should be spaced 6 feet apart. If you are unable to space tables 6 feet apart, then you should be adding physical barriers, or you should be decommissioning tables. If your tables are stuck to the ground, you should be decommissioning them. People should not be sitting in tables that are closer than 6 feet. So again, an impermeable barrier can work. If your tables are within 6 feet, but you put up an impermeable barrier between them, then you can operate like that. You should be clearly marking any area where guests or employees queue with appropriate physical distancing guidelines. Let's say you have counter payment, for example, and not table payment. You should have lines on the ground, something on the ground indicating the 6 feet of social distancing. To clarify, this is 6 feet of the table itself. Tables should be spaced 6 feet apart. You should limit table capacity and total gatherings. So diners should be limited to no more than 6 people per table. Again, even if you have bigger tables that typically fit 8, no table should have more than 6 people. And then you should limit gatherings to no more than 10 individuals. I know that this is a little complicated, a little nuanced. If you can't have more than 6 people in a table, why are we also limiting gatherings? And you know, if folks have been out to brunch or out to a bar or restaurant, you know, even if people are placed at different tables, sometimes they might mingle into the same table. So no parties, no events can have more than 10 individuals, even if they're split up into tables of 6. So you have 12 people showing up for brunch. You can't, and they're all together. You can't just have them at 2 different tables. So an important question here that I think is worth clarifying. What is the capacity limit for the restaurant, the patio, the Sidewalk Cafe as a whole? There is no specific limit. There is no capacity limit for the entire food service establishment itself. The requirement is 6 feet between tables, and 6 people or fewer at a table. There is no overall capacity limit. So again, outdoor dining only. What do we mean by outdoor dining? This means any place that is obviously outdoors. Also, a rooftop counts as outdoor dining. A building, a room with a retractable roof counts as outdoor dining. And also any location where, any space where you can remove at least 50% of a wall through doors or windows can count as outside dining, even if the seats are indoors, as long as they are within 8 feet of that opening. So sidewalk cafes, an already existing permit, can count as outdoor dining. Outdoor patios, for example. And then, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, there's a new permit we created that will allow folks to expand potentially into the street and at least into private parking spaces. Protective gear should be worn by all employees and customers. Let me repeat. Face coverings worn over the nose and the mouth, with exceptions for people with medical conditions or disabilities. Employees should be wearing these at all times. And customers should be wearing them except for when they are seated and eating. So if a customer needs to walk through your establishment to get to the bathroom or to get to an outdoor patio, or if they are lining up to pay, they should be wearing face coverings during that time. So again, outdoor dine-in, outdoor dine-in service is allowed, provided that you're meeting all of these requirements. You should be promoting hygienic interactions, ensuring that hand sanitizer or hand washing facilities are available for customer and employee use, and providing a health and safety training related to COVID-19 upon initial return to work, such as the Serve Safe Manager, delivery and takeout training, food handler training, or reopening training. Okay. So again, I'm seeing a lot of questions come through. I'm going to go through the full guidelines in total because some of the questions might be answered in a couple slides. So you should be implementing a screening measure for employees and customers. This means that employees should be self-screening to ensure that they don't have symptoms. And the language for this self-screen can be found at that website, chicago.gov/reopening. And you should also have a pledge upon your entrance or conducting some sort of screening to verify that customers are external suppliers, any delivery, anything like that is not exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms. So you don't need to screen your customers, but at minimum, you should have a sign where they enter saying, folks with COVID-19 symptoms should not enter. You should be establishing daily cleaning standards for any spaces and high-touch items. Thoroughly clean and sanitize the entire facility prior to opening and throughout the day. Provide disposable table items where possible, and if you are not providing disposable table items, clean and sanitize table items after each use. And you should be discontinuing the use of any self-serve food or drink stations. And then you should be providing visual guidance on hygiene standards and entry requirements, which you can find at that website, chicago.gov/reopening. You should also be posting an agreement of some sort for customers and third-party delivery drivers to enter the establishment. This is that pledge I talked about earlier. There should be something saying, hey, by entering, I am agreeing that I do not have COVID-19 symptoms. You should also be eliminating counter or bar seating unless the primary purpose is to serve food. If you have a bar where the primary purpose is drinking, you should be eliminating that. All patrons must be seated. No standing is allowed. If practical, you should consider workplace modifications to promote social distancing, floor markings, moving around workstations, reorienting them. And the FDA has a reopening checklist. You should be reading that in detail as well and make sure that you are complete in meeting those. You should also be limiting in-person work where possible. Obviously, your wait staff needs to work in person, but if you have staff meetings, for example, consider continuing to do them virtually or using online trainings instead of in-person trainings. I know for me, we've transitioned to virtual remote meetings, and even if and when we return, we will continue doing those. Also, limit interactions between individuals. Where practical, you should be encouraging cashless, contactless ordering and payment, and curbside takeout, carryout, and delivery. Again, I know many restaurants have established very robust curbside pickup processes. Those shouldn't just disappear come tomorrow. We expect that those should continue going. Again, this is a dimmer switch, not flicking on an entire light switch. You should be limiting travel for business. Obviously, folks do need to travel to your location, but limit travel across multiple locations so that folks are so that folks do not have to, let's say you have multiple restaurants, that they do not need to travel across both of them, that they stay really at that same location. And then you should be following health and CDC guidelines for testing and tracing protocols. So if an employee does contact COVID-19, They must follow CDC guidelines before returning to work, and you should be cleaning and disinfecting the workplace according to these CDC guidelines. If an employee has had close contact with a coworker or another person who's diagnosed with COVID-19, they should self-quarantine. And if a facility has 2 or more cases associated with an establishment over a 14-day period, you're required to report those cases to CDPH. So that's the overview of the guidelines. I am going to spend a good deal of time talking about the permit options, but I wanted to take a break right now to kind of review the important parts and to answer questions. So again, what does outdoor dining mean? Outdoor dining means any location that is obviously outdoors, such as a sidewalk cafe, a outdoor patio, something like that. It also includes a rooftop. It also includes rooms with a retractable roof that can open up. And then finally, it includes tables that are indoors, provided that they are located within 8 feet of an opening of a wall that can open at least 50% of that wall through windows or doors. Again, as long as you are within 8 feet of a wall that that can open at least 50% of that wall through doors or windows. So you know, there's lots of restaurants, lots of bars that have big front openings that are used throughout the summer. Those can be used provided that tables are within 8 feet. So I'm going to go through a couple of the questions. So again, I'm going to talk in a second about the permit. Businesses are not allowed to set up outside without a permit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing to make it easier for folks to get permits. So places that, let me scroll through these questions real quick. Great. So if you're able to seat a customer I have a great question here. If I'm able to seat a customer on a patio without having them walk through our indoor space, do they need to wear masks? So if it's possible for them to literally enter and go straight to their seat without walking through any sort of common area, whether that's indoor or outdoors, then you don't need to require a mask. But if they're in any common area whatsoever, then they do need a mask. The 6-foot measurement is from tables. The tables need to be 6 feet apart. Right? I had a question, and I think I did answer this, but what's the maximum amount of guests allowed on a patio? There is no maximum amount of guests on the patio, and it's just 6 people per table, 6 feet between tables. An office building cafeteria that does not have outdoor seating, will they be allowed to seat guests inside or only takeout? Anything that does not have outdoor seating will not be allowed. So they cannot seat guests inside. You can continue to do takeout, carry out, delivery. So I had a question, why is it necessary to get disposable plates? Etc. As a reminder, the recommendation is to use disposable items where practical, but it is not a requirement. If you are not using disposable items, you should be making sure to sanitize them, clean them between use. So I had a question about a small indoor restaurant with plexiglass between tables, maximum 10 per seating. Under phase 3, if you're entirely indoor, again, you cannot reopen. You'll have to wait till phase 4 for that. I've seen a couple kind of specific questions that are about, about your specific business and your exact setup. If you can, submit those questions to me via that email, and I'll make sure to give you a response, because those are really specific ones, so I want to make sure that I'm cognizant of everyone's time. Great. So restaurants with sidewalk cafes can open beginning tomorrow. Great. And then, sorry, if you, here's a great question. Are we required to give access to our restrooms if we have tables out for carry out only? So if you're only doing carry out, as you have been over the last month, then you're not required to use to have access to the restrooms. If if you are using tables and having any on-site dining, then you do need to follow the health department requirements for restaurants. Are shared commercial kitchens allowed for food that is for delivery? Yes, shared commercial kitchens can reopen under these guidelines. Great. Great question. For outdoor sidewalk cafes, does the first table need to be 6 feet from the planter box or the beginning of the sidewalk? No. The tables do not need to be 6 feet away from anything other than other tables. And the reason for this is the health department and the science shows that this is most easily transmitted when folks are within 6 feet for more than 10 minutes. So if you're sitting at a sidewalk cafe and someone is walking by you, your chance of transmission will be relatively minimal. Another point I want to make, and I apologize if I didn't get to all these questions on the guidelines, I'll try to get to them at the end, but I want to make sure to talk about the permit options. One additional point of clarification I want to provide. As the mayor announced on Friday, the on-site consumption of alcohol will be allowed until 11 p.m. at restaurants and establishments that are reopening for outdoor dining. So any on-site consumption of alcohol will now be allowed starting until 11 p.m. As you know, there was a liquor curfew in place till 9 p.m. That liquor curfew is still in place for anybody that is selling packaged goods to go. So if a restaurant or a bar or a liquor store or a grocery store is selling alcohol to go, that is still limited to 9 p.m. However, as you may know, and as you hopefully know, we are currently under a citywide curfew that is in effect at 9 p.m. That citywide curfew trumps any other rules. So as long as we are in this citywide curfew, which is in place for the time until further notice, we will let folks know when it changes. As long as we are under that curfew, everybody needs to close at 9 p.m. That's across the board. When that curfew is taken back, then on-site consumption of alcohol can happen until 11 p.m. If you have any questions about that, we'll be releasing more details in the coming days. But for now, the citywide curfew, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. is the most important thing. So I wanted to talk about the permit options for outdoor dining. So again, outdoor dining requires a permit. You cannot just move chairs and tables out to the parking lot that you have with your establishment. We want to make sure this is done safely and this is done properly. Now we do have options in place though for folks that want that. First, let me give an overview of all outdoor dining. Again, in yellow with 6 stars. You need a retail food establishment license in order to open for outdoor dining. Rooms with retractable roofs or indoor spaces near windows that can open up at least 50% of a wall, you do not need any additional permit or license beyond your retail food establishment license. Outdoor patios and rooftops require an outdoor patio license from BACP if you are serving alcohol. Now, if you have an outdoor patio or a rooftop and you're not serving alcohol, then all you need is the retail food establishment license. However, that space must be included and must be recognized as part of your retail food establishment license. What about a sidewalk cafe? So sidewalk cafes can begin opening tomorrow. And I'm going to have an entire slide on sidewalk cafes. So if you have questions there, I'll make sure, hopefully, to answer them. So you do need a sidewalk cafe permit, and that is required to be operating in a sidewalk cafe starting tomorrow. Finally, what if you want to operate on the street or if you want to operate under private property? Let's say you have a parking lot that's just yours, or you're on a cul-de-sac, a side street, and you want to open up there. We've established a new permitting process specifically for this activity called the Expanded Outdoor Dining Permit. and that will allow you to expand into the street potentially and expand into private property. Another option is if you want to do this temporarily, then you should be using the expanded outdoor dining permit. However, if you want to permanently expand into private property space, then you should really be expanding your retail food establishment license. Let's say you have a back patio that you've never served food on before, but you want to start doing so, and you want to keep doing that permanently, you should be expanding your retail food establishment license. And provided that there aren't major changes going on, we can process that very, very quickly. Right. So let me talk quickly about the Sidewalk Cafe permit. This is an existing permit that is issued by BACP. What is the Sidewalk Cafe? I know many of you already know this, but I want to make sure to review. This is a space located on the sidewalk that a retail food establishment is expanding out from their establishment into the sidewalk immediately adjacent or in front of it. It cannot extend to the street or onto empty lots. It must be fully enclosed by a boundary except for a kind of one entrance area. And it also needs to be positioned to allow for a 6 feet clearance for pedestrians. So how do you go about getting a Sidewalk Cafe permit? Many of you already know this, but I do want to make clear that we are continuing to process Sidewalk Cafe permits. We've had over 800 applications so far this year, and we're continuing to process them quickly. But let me make sure I'm talking to you and I'm providing a little overview of that process, because there is code mandated by law processes to this. First, you need to submit a completed application to the local alderman for review. After the alderman reviews it, you then submit a completed application to BACP. Now, typically you could do this in person. Now, with our offices closed to the public, you can submit it via email to publicwayuse@cityofchicago.org. BACP then processes it, and in order for us to issue the permit, it must be submitted to City Council. This needs to go through City Council, which only currently meets once a month. And once it's submitted to City Council, we will send an invoice to the applicant, which will give them information on how to pay. Once they pay, which they can do online, and once we receive a current certificate of insurance, we will mail the Sidewalk Cafe permit to the applicant's premises. So we know that this is a little bit of a cumbersome process, and we're working to change that process, and we're working to expedite these. We're working with our aldermen, with the City Council, in order to do that. This is the process right now. We'll make sure to communicate any changes. Any changes to this will have to go through City Council, and will have to be, there will have to be a law change, but that's something that we're open to and we would love to do, but we do need to go through City Council first. So I saw a couple questions going through for Sidewalk Cafes. Great, so I saw a question, are we open to renew Sidewalk Cafe permits? Yes, we are open. If you have any questions, go to email publicwayuse@cityofchicago.org. If you've been putting off your renewal during this time, you can please, you can get that done ASAP, and we'll work closely with you to do that as well. Great. Saw a question, certain streets that will close to help out restaurants. How will that work? I'm going to get to that on the next slide. Great question. What if you want to expand the size of your existing Sidewalk Cafe permit, potentially by expanding in front of neighbors' property? So right now, that's something that isn't allowed under the Sidewalk Cafe rules and under the law. But that is something that we're open to, and that is something we're looking into. And as soon as we have more information on that, we will be sharing it. So now I want to talk, I know there's more questions coming in, but I want to talk about this expanded outdoor dining permit. This is something new that we just set up in conjunction with Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events and the Department of Transportation. This is something brand new, specifically for restaurants wanting to do outdoor dining during phase 3. And this is a permit that you can apply for, and I'll talk about how to apply in just one second, to request a couple different things. You can request full street closure while maintaining a maintaining a 12-foot fire lane, or you can request the use of private property, such as a parking lot. Applications must be submitted by chambers or by SSAs or business service organizations, or by 3 restaurants together if you are intending to close a street. One restaurant by itself cannot request the closure of a street. However, one restaurant can use this permit if they want to expand into their parking lot, for example. And there's no processing fee. However, if you have a liquor license, we'll be using the liquor special event permit, so there will be a small temporary liquor permit fee. So again, applicants can request full street closure if they are a chamber, an SSA, a business service organization, or 3+ restaurants. However, restaurants just by themselves that want to expand into their own parking lot can use this permit to do so. How do you apply? You can apply at chicago.gov/dcase. On that page, you will see a tile for special events permits. I know this isn't a special event permit, but we're using it. We're using the special event permit process in order to process these. And you can find the application there. There's also an FAQ there and ways to get more information, and the application can be fully submitted online. The following documents must be submitted as part of the application. You need a floor plan or a site plan, security plan, emergency action plan, certificate of insurance, a liquor license if you are serving alcohol outside with applicable dram shop insurance, and you need a waste management plan. So I got a lot more detail on this I'm going to get into. I see a couple questions coming in. So a little bit about this. We have identified 6 pilot locations that we've already worked with the chambers and the aldermen and businesses in that area to identify those locations for street closure. If you're in that area, and you can find more information about that at chicago.gov. If you're in one of those pilot areas, you should be working with your local chamber to see if you are eligible to do that, if you want to participate. A couple questions. So if 3 restaurants are applying together, who's the applicant? That's a great question, and we're working on developing the specifics for that. But we would like to have somebody be the kind of main applicant, but you do need to have folks to have 3 restaurants together. Great. So I'm going to throw up a couple frequently asked questions about the expanded outdoor dining permit. Will restaurants with parking meters in front of their restaurants be eligible? Yes. Everything will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis to take to evaluate the impact on parking. It is a 180-day permit that can last that long as the restaurant is following rules and guidelines. We will be reviewing these closely every single week. For example, we do not want street closures to turn into street festivals. That is the worst thing we can do right now for our health, for the health of our community. And we will be reviewing and we will be looking closely, particularly at these 6 locations. Importantly, for the first 2 weeks of this permit, the permit will only allow for the closure of streets on Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. We'll then be determining hours of operation will be determined on a case-by-case basis. So this really is going to be a pilot, and we're going to see how it's going. Can I erect a tent on the right-of-way? No, tents are not allowed as a part of this. However, we're encouraging table umbrellas. Do you need a temporary food vendor license? No. As long as the kitchen where the food is prepared has a retail food license, then they can apply for this. So some resources, and I'm going to keep this on for a little bit. Who should I contact with questions about the permit? Always, you can contact BACP Outreach at cityofchicago.org. Me or my team will funnel you to the right folks. But if you have questions about the permit itself, please contact Chai Dining at cityofchicago.org. If you have questions about the traffic plan, if you're working on a street closure, traffic plan, things like that, email c.permitsupport@cityofchicago.org. If you have liquor license questions, you can email Brian Knipper from the BACP team. And then finally, this link here, chicago.gov/NBDC, has some, will help you find your local chamber or business association. Now, I've seen a couple questions come in, and I'm going to open it up for questions now about outdoor dining permits, either this expanded outdoor dining, sidewalk cafes, things like that. Great. Does the Friday to Sunday closure also include the 6 streets announced by the mayor last week? Yes. For those 6 streets that we announced last week, they will only be operating for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for now. Questions about sidewalk cafes. We've already submitted our application. Can we open tomorrow? You need to have a valid sidewalk cafe permit in order to operate. The next city council meeting is on June 17th, and we're working quickly to get those processed and to get them into your hands as quickly as possible. But for now, you do need to have that existing sidewalk cafe permit in order to operate. Great question. What about expanding into an empty lot like a parking lot? This is where the expanded outdoor dining permit can be used for you as a restaurant that wants to expand into your own private parking lot. Now, we're hoping to process these very, very quickly. And if you submit a completed application, we can process permits within 5 days, especially if all you're doing is one restaurant that's just expanding out into your existing parking lot. We can do that within 5 days, and we can get you out there ASAP. If you have liquor, we do make sure that you have, again, that you have the liquor license and that you have the dram shop insurance. But we can, again, get that done as quickly as possible. Can a restaurant expand into a neighboring parking lot? That's a great question. Again, this permit can be used for outdoor dining at private locations. So in private property. So if it is private property, then you can, as long as you provide some sort of proof of that, of use of that location, then you can use this permit. So, as a reminder, I've got a question. Does a restaurant have to be represented by an SSA or chamber? If you are looking for street closure, and let me just pull this right back up on the permit itself. If you are looking for street closure, if you want to expand into the street, the application must be submitted by a chamber, an SSA, a business service organization, or 3+ restaurants applying together. If you are just applying to expand into private property, not public property, but private property, then you do not need to be an SSA, a chamber, a business service organization, or multiple restaurants. Then you just need to, you can do that just yourself. We want folks to get those applications in as soon as possible. We do strongly recommend that you read over the requirements very, very closely and that you submit completed applications. Completed applications can be processed within 5 days. But, as you can imagine, we're going to get a lot of these, and we have a small team working on it, and they're dedicated to this, but it is a pretty small team. So submitting the completed application, please, we'll make sure that we get them done as soon as possible. Someone had a question specifically about their Sidewalk Cafe, that they should have received an invoice. Can you please submit that question to me via the BACP outreach? I can check up into that. Got a question about pop-up tents. Pop-up tents are not to be used. Tents do require a permit themselves, so you should not be using pop-up tents. We do, though, strongly encourage, umbrellas, things like that. Great. So, got a question about expanding an existing outdoor patio license onto existing private property. You really have 2 options here. If you have an existing outdoor patio and you want to expand it onto existing private property. The first option is if you want to do this permanently. If you want to turn this into a permanent outdoor patio license. If that is what you want to do, then you should submit a change to your outdoor patio license through BACP. And if you reach out to BACP Outreach, I will help you get the information you need to do that. But that does take, the full license processing process. However, if all you want to do is do it for a temporary time during phase 3, then you can just apply for the expanded outdoor dining permit which you can again find at the DCASE website. I know there's a couple additional questions that came through. I'll do my best to answer them in just 1 second. I do want to make sure to get to the last couple slides though, because these are useful things for food service establishments. First, I want to remind you all about the Be Safe Chicago self-certification pledge that you can take again at the chicago.gov/reopening website. Please, we're strongly encouraging employers to take this self-certification. You indicate you're in the food service industry, and you basically pledge, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do all these guidelines under the industry. And then you'll get a Be Safe Chicago pledge that you can print out and post at your place of business. We just updated this. You actually can get Be Safe your specific neighborhood. So Be Safe Chatham, Be Safe Be Safe Austin, Be Safe Lincoln Park. So you can show a little bit of neighborhood pride as well. The reason why we want you to do this is really threefold. First, we want you to make sure you know these guidelines. You can read them, you can review them, but by pledging to do them, you're showing that you are really know them. Second, you're showing your workers that you are opening and pledging to reopen safely. And finally, you're showing your customers. When a customer goes into a business, they see the Be Safe Chicago pledge. They know that that business understands the phase 3 reopening. Finally, there's been a lot of talk about PPE, and I want to make sure that businesses know how they can access PPE for affordable prices from verified sources. So the city of Chicago has stood up a local PPE market by working with a local startup called Replay. So if you go to chicagopppemarket.com and you can register there to get protection shields, hand sanitizers, face masks, face guards, gloves, things like that. And you know that they're verified sources and they're affordable, competitive prices. So if you're in need of any PPE, please check out the Chicago PPE market for that. Right. So it is a little after 5. I saw a couple questions go through regarding specific questions about about the insurance requirement. If you can please submit those questions to the outreach email, I'll make sure the right folks get those answers for you. And any questions I did not answer, I do apologize. I hope this was useful. I do want to, reiterate that tomorrow is a soft and cautious reopening. We want to make sure that we're prepared and that we don't have to, shift back to phase 2. That's not something we want to do. We want to make sure everybody is opening cautiously and safely. And also we want to make sure that restaurants are, and all businesses are safe during this, particularly challenging time. So feel free to reach out to that outreach email with any questions. If I did not get to your question, I do apologize. And I will follow up as soon as possible. Thank you all.